Little weekend update for you. A little trip with one of the organizations to. We're going to a nursery school, do some work on a bomb shelter. Had to go get supplies first. The day honestly turned into quite the adventure. It started out by randomly asking me if I could drive a car, which I thought they were coming to pick me up, so I wasn't entirely sure what was going on. And then they arrived and picked me up. Later in the day, would find out that I was going to be driving a car back. So we're gonna tell a little story about driving through Kyiv. Anyway, a whole lot to talk about to get up to that point. So we had to go pick up some supplies, driving around to various locations. The first place, the good place we were trying to get to, was like a little lumber yard in kind of a rougher part of town. But just so happened to turn out that there was an apartment fire, so there were fire trucks blocking the alley from either direction, so you couldn't actually get into the lumber yard. So we went to a different place. Can't recall the name of it, but it reminded me a lot of like a Home Depot. Really nice. Went in there. Something was wrong with the documentation, payment. I'm not entirely sure what was going on. Hopped back in the car. The VW van, and headed back over to the other place, hoping that the fire department had left. And we got there and they were gone. It took quite a bit to get everything loaded, but we loaded up a bunch of concrete and a bunch of mastic sealant that we were going to paint on the walls. A whole bunch of other little odds and ends. We started on our road trip west of town, which was a solid 45 minutes to an hour, if I recall. The two really nice guys that I was tagging along with, we're going to call them Alex and Andy. Alex, the driver, he was kind of the brains of the operation. Both of them Ukrainians. Alex kind of told me his story about the beginning of the war in 22, when the full-scale invasion started, and the Russians invaded from the north to try and capture Kyiv, crossing the border of Belarus. As a civilian, he was part of the people that when the government decided to drive trucks around, as he said, it was a large truck with 5,000 AK-47s in the back, and handing them out to anybody willing to fight. He was one of the ones. He went up and he scooped up 3 for him and his friends. They headed to the outskirts of town to meet the Russians, and just the idea of the bravery that it would take for somebody with no military background to just be handed a rifle and to go meet a professional, very well-equipped military, and to do that is with a level of bravery that I have never known in my life. We headed off to the small town of Kolenshchina and unloaded all the materials. We had to take a whole bunch of pictures and stuff. At this point, it had gotten pretty late in the day. It had taken probably a solid 4 hours just to get up to this point with the supplies and everything. And so we moved all the supplies into a covered shed, and he showed me around the shelter and all the work that they'd been doing. And, actually one thing he explained to me is the school is a Karatushka nursery school, so it's a kindergarten. They're actually not allowed to function as a school because they don't have a shelter, so this is kind of that final step into this school finally being able to reopen and get kids back in there. From that point is when we were going to head off to Irpin to get the donated car. Met up with the gal who's donating it and deal with the paperwork and stuff like that. And then after we got into the car, Alex and Andy had decided that they wanted to show me around Irpin a little bit. And I know a little bit about the history of Irpin as far as the war was concerned. But, and for the sake of feeling as though I'm partaking in some form of like dark tourism, it might not have sat with me really well initially, but they were pretty insistent on showing me some of the sights in town, and I kind of came to realize that as Ukrainians, they really want me to see what the Russians have done to them. So we headed off to the Irpin Bridge, which it's now called the Romanovsky Mist, which is it is now a memorial of sorts. It is a bridge that was demolished in the opening week of the full-scale invasion to try and stop the Russians from getting to Kyiv, because Irpin is located northwest of Kyiv. There's nothing between Irpin and Kyiv other than woods and the Irpin River. The Irpin Bridge is only about 6 kilometers, about 3.5 miles from the outskirts of the city, and it actually lies on the city limits itself, but really is kind of the last stepping stone that the invading Russians would have had to take to then try and enter Kyiv. The bridge is still sitting there as it was the day it was demolished. There was still a couple of vehicles in the water, which I didn't quite understand why that was left there until I went back and recalled the famous pictures taken of the bridge, which I'm going to put on screen in contrast with mine to understand why that truck was left there. It is kind of the centerpiece of the famous photos of the refugees crossing the river, trying to flee to get into Kyiv and get away from the Russians. There was also a church right across the street that was very, it still shows the scars of war today, even though it has been, from what I can tell, restored to the point to where it's a functional church. There is another bit of a memorial that is a junkyard or a car graveyard. I can't remember exactly the phrase he used for it, but it is cars from Ukrainians as they were trying to flee the Russian advance, getting to the Irpin Bridge and then having to abandon their vehicles and cross the bridge. And when the Russians approached, they had seen all the vehicles, they then proceeded to destroy all of the vehicles. And now all of these cars have been placed in a parking lot on a freeway, and some of which are painted with sunflowers and slogans and stuff like that. And it is kind of, again, just another reminder of what it means to be, liberated by the Russians. Finally, I get to hopping in the car, which they basically just kind of threw me the keys and threw me sent me a pin on Google Maps and said, "See you there." And so I got to drive this little French car through Kyiv. It's pretty nervous starting out because as a pedestrian, I've already noticed that the roadways in Ukraine are kind of the Wild West. But all in all, it was the trip itself was kind of fun, and it's been my weekend in a nutshell, I guess. And we'll see what the week brings from here. So, see ya.